Close your eyes, take a breath, and imagine diving beneath the waves. The constant buzz of everyday life fades away, and you find yourself immersed in a colourful world full of life. Vibrant fish surround you as the sea turtle glides past. Intricate structures cover the sea floor. You have just entered one of the most extraordinary places on Earth, a coral reef.
Hello, my name is Chloe. I will be your presenter today, and thank you so much for joining in on my first ever episode of Voices of the Reef. I'm currently sat on a small picnic island in the middle of South Ari Atoll, Maldives, surrounded by what we're going to be talking about today. Today, we're going to explore the amazing and wonderful world of coral reefs, their biology, the threats that they face, and the amazing conservation initiatives that are happening all around our planet to try and save these amazing and special ecosystems. So I think it's important that we actually start off talking about what a coral actually is. A coral is considered an animal. People are always surprised when I say that a coral is an animal. It's not a rock or a plant. It's most closely related to jellyfish and sea anemones. And this is because of those stinging cells that live within the polyps of each coral. A coral is actually formed of thousands of small polyps that are individual animals. And together they create a colony of coral. And what's really special about corals is the symbiotic relationship that they have with the zooxanthellae that lives in their tissues. Symbiotic relationships happen all throughout the animal kingdom, but they're incredibly important for our corals. They harbor a small microscopic algae that lives within their tissues. These algae provide the coral with 90% of their nutrients. And these algae are then in turn given a place to live inside the coral. This is what we mean when we say a symbiotic relationship. Both the coral and the zooxanthellae is benefiting from that relationship. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about coral bleaching further into the podcast, but essentially what happens when a coral bleaches is it gets stressed. Algae that lives within it thinks it's no longer a safe place to live, and it will actually leave the corals. And this is what causes that kind of stark white color. Now, coral reefs take thousands of years to form. The Great Barrier Reef is 10,000 years old. What happens is our hard corals will come along and they will start to build the foundation of the reef. Things like our brain corals or bouldering corals, species like parietes, they really are kind of like the reef building blocks. What comes along next are more intricate corals like our acroporas, our highly branching corals, and also our soft corals. They provide places for lots of animals to live. A specific one that I really want to talk about is the bubble coral. It's a picture of it right here. And in the bubble coral lives the bubble shrimp. This shrimp lives specifically within this species of coral, and it will clean the coral and make sure that it's nice and tidy, keeping its house clean. But it also gets nutrients from the coral. Anything that gets trapped in the coral, the little bubble shrimp can eat. Super cool and an amazing, again, beneficial relationship for both animals. Coral reefs are often called the rainforests of the sea. And this is because they are the most biodiverse habitat on our planet, even more so than any rainforest. They're home to 25% of all marine life and cover only 1% of the ocean floor, an area the size of Papua New Guinea. Coral reefs are home to an incredible number of different species that all work in harmony with one another. And we have to remember as humans that we have a responsibility to make sure that these ecosystems are kept in balance. Every time I go out onto a coral reef, I'm just mesmerized by the number of different species of fish, coral, starfish, just everything. And it's just beautiful and so amazing. And I remember the first time I saw a coral with my own eyes. I had been to the Great Barrier Reef in 2017, and where we went was actually completely dead. It was totally bleached, and there was just hardly any life there. So I was incredibly saddened by this and disappointed. So the first time I actually saw a healthy, thriving reef, I was quite old. It was during my master's, and I was 23 years old. I was captivated. I had never seen anything like it. Sorry, we've got a seaplane going past. 1 second. I had never seen anything like a healthy coral reef. And when you're swimming over it, there really is nothing like it. They're just amazing. Each animal on a coral reef has its own special and unique role. Up here, you'll see an image of a reef trophic level. At the top, we have our apex predators, animals like sharks, predatory fish like giant trevallies or bluefin tuna. Underneath that, we then have our herbivorous fish, our grazing fish, surgeonfish, parrotfish, for example, which, by the way, are responsible for 70% of the sand produced in Maldives. Isn't that insane? So, this here is basically parrotfish poo. Wow, always blows my mind. And under that, we have the primary producers, and they photosynthesize. Now, as humans, we have an important role to play in maintaining these really fragile reef ecosystems. We take too much too quickly, and this can really affect our coral reefs. Now, there are so many different threats that our reefs face, and one of them is overfishing. It's estimated that 34% of all fisheries are overexploited. This means that we're essentially taking fish too quickly from the sea, and they're actually not able to populate in time. So their populations are basically collapsing. Now, of course, coral reefs are the lifeblood of so many different coastal communities, especially here in the Maldives, countries like Seychelles, and of course, places in Southeast Asia rely heavily on coral reefs for a number of reasons, but especially to provide food for their families. There are sustainable ways that we can fish, for example, pole and line fisheries or traditional cages like they use in the Seychelles. You're able to target a specific species, a specific size, and it has very low levels of bycatch. This is considered sustainable fishing. But in some countries, they actually will bomb the reef, and this is called dynamite fishing. It's so dangerous for the fishermen and incredibly harmful for coral reefs. The fishermen will literally throw dynamite onto a reef and blow it up, and all of those fish will die and basically float up to the surface. The fishermen will then take these fish and either sell them or keep them for their families to eat. Of course, this is an incredibly destructive way of fishing. And if we can give these fishermen and communities an understanding of how short term this kind of fishing is, because once you destroy an area, it's dead. It's going to take decades for the reef to come back, and of course, then the fish and other animals to come back. So, if we were to fish in a more sustainable way, we'd make sure that we have a prolonged source of food for a much longer time. I'd like to talk about some of the special and amazing animals that we have on our coral reefs. One that many people might not think of, but is so important for the health of our reefs, is sea cucumbers. And sea cucumbers are essentially the vacuum cleaners of the reef. They're what we call detritivores and decomposers. So they will eat decaying or dead matter on the reef substrate. They will poo it out as nutrients into the water. So they're incredibly important nutrient cyclers. They're really responsible for maintaining low levels of disease on the reef as well, making sure that that disease doesn't spread throughout the rest of the reef ecosystem. Another really amazing super animal on our coral reefs are predatory fish, animals like groupers and tuna. They're really important because they maintain the levels of fish underneath them. If we were to overfish and remove all of the groupers from an ecosystem, then they won't be able to control the populations of grazing fish underneath them. Therefore, these animals will start to overgraze on the reef substrate, on the algae, and this can have lots of negative effects like lower coral recruitment. Our reefs are, of course, important for the marine life and maintaining the health of our oceans in general. But not only that, they're so crucial for humans as well. Of course, they're home to all of that biodiversity. Secondly, they provide fish for many coastal communities. Around 13% of the human population lives near a coral reef. It provides an amazing amount of food and income. 6 billion USD is generated globally every single year through coral reef fisheries alone. Interestingly enough, 36 billion USD is generated globally every single year through coral reef tourism. That money is generated by tourists coming to these beautiful countries like the Maldives, like Seychelles, like the Great Barrier Reef to see the wonder of coral reefs. This is a crucial income for many countries. Coral reef tourism is what brings the most money into the country for the Maldives. So it's a really important part of their economy. Now, I want you to imagine that you live in a low-lying country like the Maldives, right near the coast, and you're getting some stormy weather, and there's really high wave energy. These waves are crashing onto your beach. Well, coral reefs are basically natural sea walls. They help to stop coastal erosion. When that wave energy is heading towards the shore, it hits a coral reef, and that energy is then displaced and spread out. So the waves aren't hitting the shore at such a great impact. And this really helps to reduce beach erosion. Coral reefs provide really important coastal defenses for many different communities. They also help to protect mangroves and seagrass meadows. Coral reefs have even helped to give people ingredients for life-saving medication. There's an amazing species of Caribbean reef sponge that has actually helped us to discover key ingredients for life-saving medication in the fight against HIV and leukemia. Now, I want you to imagine a world without coral reefs. What do you think that would look like? How would the health of our oceans be? How would the economy of countries like the Maldives and Seychelles be? I know the answer to a certain extent. There would be serious problems. Our coral reefs are slowly dying, and this is because of human-induced impacts. I would say the most important one and the most concerning is climate change. The temperature of our seas is rising, and our corals are very sensitive to even the slightest change in the sea temperature. They usually like temperatures between 25 to 28 degrees Celsius. Any hotter than this, and they can start to bleach. When a coral bleaches, it will release its zooxanthellae. Remember that algae I spoke about in the beginning of the podcast? And it will turn this kind of bright white, this stark white color. And when I'm out on the reef, these corals really stick out like a sore thumb. Now, what's happened there is the corals have lost their zooxanthellae, and the zooxanthellae is actually what gives the coral their color. Now, because the zooxanthellae gives the coral 90% of its nutrients, it essentially starts to starve. So you can kind of think of coral bleaching as coral starvation. They will start to starve, their immune systems will be less strong, so therefore they're more likely to get diseases. And the longer the temperature of the water remains at a higher level, the more likely a bleaching event is to occur. Now, you've probably seen these images like this and this, where the reef is entirely white. Now, if that temperature does drop, the reef can pick up its zooxanthellae again and carry on about its life. But in some cases, the sea temperature doesn't drop, and coral bleaching can wipe out reefs. Now, there are a number of different threats that coral reefs face, and these can all kind of impact on the likelihood of a bleaching event taking place. Firstly is overfishing. If a coral reef ecosystem is already impacted through overfishing and the trophic levels are all out of balance, then this, of course, is going to affect the health of our reefs in general. Secondly is pollution. So in some areas, sewage water and rainwater runoff is flowing directly onto our coral reefs. This is, of course, introducing nutrients like nitrates and phosphates into the ecosystem. And guess what really loves to eat and feed off of nitrates and phosphates? Algae. Now, this is why we sometimes will get algae blooms, a combination of high levels of nutrients and warmer temperatures. Algae can completely suffocate coral reefs. If it's being suffocated and covered in algae, then it's not able to get that light that the zooxanthellae needs to be able to photosynthesize properly. Not only does it introduce high levels of nutrients like phosphates and nitrates, it can also introduce diseases. So in areas like the Caribbean, they're really having a problem with black band disease. This is a disease that basically creates a black band around the coral, and it will start to slowly spread through the coral and kill off all of that living tissue. Corals can get sick just like people. They can get viral, fungal, and bacterial infections. Scientists are still trying to come up with ways in how we can combat coral reef diseases, using things like marine epoxies to try and stop lesions spreading throughout the rest of a colony. And in some cases, you can actually treat corals with an antibacterial medication. But diseases can really kill reefs in a matter of months. It can wipe out entire reefs. And this is really something that we are seeing. So, a really important threat that reefs face, especially in countries such as the Maldives, is sedimentation. Now, what I mean when I say sedimentation is basically natural and artificial movement of sand through the water column. So, in places like the Maldives, they see lots of sand movement throughout the year. So, areas of beaches will be eroded away, and that sand will move to another part of the island. So, places like resorts will actually sand pump to move areas of sand from one place to another. And a thing that is happening in the Maldives at the moment is way too much land reclamation. So the government is actually pumping sand and creating whole islands. And of course, this is going to kill reefs in the area because they're pumping huge amounts of sand. That sand is being suspended in the water column, meaning that it's floating about. Now, that sand needs to settle somewhere, and it will settle directly onto a coral reef. And of course, this suffocates the reef. It's not able to feed and get the light that it needs, and it will wipe out reefs. And this is something that we are seeing in the Maldives. Let's say a reef is healthy at the moment and it's doing well, it hasn't got many of these human induced impacts, then it will be less likely to bleach because it's stronger, it's healthier. If we've got a reef that's overfished, it's got disease, it's got sedimentation problems, then of course that reef is going to be more likely to bleach. The NOAA are actually predicting a mild to severe bleaching event later, maybe in May or June. And this is really, really concerning because our reefs in the Maldives just underwent a massive bleaching in 2024. The time between bleaching events is getting much smaller. So these reefs aren't actually getting to be able to recover from these bleaching events. So we've covered some of the threats that coral reefs face. I think it's important that we now focus on the amazing NGOs and the amazing people that are working to save our coral reefs. And there are so many of them trying their absolute best and their hardest to make sure that our coral reefs survive for generations to come and for the health of our oceans. Of course, the most important thing that people can do is reducing their carbon emissions. Another way that we can help save coral reefs is through coral restoration. And this is essentially like reforestation, but for coral reefs. And there are huge projects going on all around the world in the Maldives, in Seychelles, in places like Indonesia and Thailand. They're all working to try and save our coral reefs through restoration. And how it works is you can actually take what's called a fragment of opportunity. So, a piece of coral that's broken or fallen off, and you can actually attach it to a frame or directly onto the reef using kind of like a cement or epoxy to attach it. Now, sometimes you can actually harvest coral from its coral colony and then attach it onto a frame or the reef. The coral will then start to grow, and this is called asexual reproduction. So the genes of the coral that you have fragmented will be exactly the same as the genes that you harvested it from. So if the coral that you harvested it from is not very heat resilient, then that fragment that grows into its own colony will also not be very heat resilient. Sexual reproduction in corals is really fascinating and is being used in restoration. So people are trying to basically catch when corals are spawning and harvest the eggs and the sperm. They will take them into a lab and grow coral larvae inside a controlled environment. When the larvae are big enough, they will grow into a small coral recruit, and these can be placed back out onto the reef. They're less likely to get predated. They're a little bit more hardy, so they're more likely to survive and grow into our beautiful coral colonies. We can restore huge areas of coral reef, but it's important that we're restoring the reef with hardy species whilst maintaining that biodiversity. So you don't want an area that's all acroporas or all one species, because we need to make sure that there's biodiversity maintained and habitats for all different animal species to live in. I truly think that any type of conservation is most powerful when it is led by local communities. And there are some really amazing NGOs that I want to point out that are helping to give that power back to communities, that knowledge, so they are able to protect these ecosystems that are so important for their life and their well being. One that I want to mention is Maldives Resilient Reefs. They're an amazing Maldivian NGO. They are essentially working to make sure our reefs in the Maldives are climate resilient and will be here for generations to come. They do amazing projects like supporting local fishermen to provide fish to resorts. They will be paid very well, and this is encouraging them to make sure that they are fishing sustainably. So, to be a part of the Lamasilu Massiveria program, these fishermen must make sure that they're catching fish sustainably to sell to local resorts. Emma are also teaching kids on local islands all about coral reefs, taking them out to be Reef Check certified so they understand how they can survey and look at the health of a reef ecosystem in a scientific way. Another really amazing NGO is Coral Catch. This is based in Indonesia, and they are actually empowering women in Indonesia to partake and drive forward coral conservation. So they will train these women, teach them how to be divers, and teach them how to restore coral reefs. And this is so amazing because women led, community led ocean conservation is so powerful and so impactful because it's always coming from the heart. And I want to shout out to all the MBs, marine biologists in the Maldives, that are working on their own restoration project because every frame matters. We now have 205 square meters of reef restored here at Outrigger, where I currently work. And you can really tell the difference of an area that's been restored. There's so many more fish, so much more biodiversity. And we've actually got two resident sea turtles, hawksbills, that are hanging out quite often in our coral garden now. So that's really, really exciting. We've talked about the threats that coral reefs face and some of the work that local communities are doing to help save coral reefs. But I think it's important that I talk about what you as a listener can do to help save our coral reefs, because there really is lots of different things that you can do in your everyday life to help out our oceans in general and our coral reefs. And I've said, I think that trying to reduce your carbon emissions is so important. It's almost Earth Day, and the theme this year is Our Planet, Our Power. And this is all about trying to remember and remind people that they have the power to save our planet and to help contribute to the conservation of our wildlife. Every small difference that you make, whether that's taking the bus to work or turning off your AC at night and using a fan instead, this all makes such a positive change and a positive difference. Secondly, making sure that you're eating sustainable seafood. So anything that's been pole and line caught, it usually has low levels of bycatch. Anything that says Marine Stewardship Council certified, don't listen to it. It's a load of nonsense. Many fisheries will actually buy their certification. If they have enough money, they can basically be certified, and they will still be catching whales and dolphins and seabirds and all other of these amazing animals that are already at threat. So try and stick to tuna or salmon that has been pole and line caught. Stay away from species like Atlantic cod. Their populations have declined by over 90%. They're an incredibly endangered species. And stay away from species like scallops that are actually caught using dredging. Really, really unsustainable way of fishing. Another thing that you can do is reducing your plastic pollution. 80% of all marine litter is made up out of plastic. Now, of course, this doesn't just disappear, it often ends up in our oceans, and this breaks down into microplastics. This can affect all sorts of different animals. We're finding microplastics in the brain of humans, in the gut of people. If we're ingesting and eating fish that have been feasting on those microplastics, then that's, of course, going to end up in your body as well. And we still don't know the negative impacts of microplastics on people. If you can use your voice to vote or sign petitions in any way that help contribute to protecting 30% of our oceans by 2030, protesting against land reclamation, making sure that our politicians know that we want to protect and save our coral reefs and that we're not interested in short-term gain. We want to make sure that these ecosystems are around for our future generations and for the future of our oceans and all of the animals that live there. Most importantly, speaking up about what you've learned here today, telling your family, sharing this podcast with them, and really spreading awareness. The more that we know about these amazing animals and these amazing ecosystems, the more we actually want to protect them. So if I ask you to do one thing today, it's take your favorite fact from this podcast and tell as many people as you can in your family or your friends. Spread that awareness, spread that education, because it really is truly powerful. If there's anything that you would like me to focus on specifically in the next coming podcast, please leave a comment down below or DM me on Instagram. I would be more than happy to hear your recommendations. But I want to thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Voices of the Reef. Thank you. Bye, guys.